We have to shed the restrictions that have been put in place for all these years. And rather than try to battle our way into that hostile arena, we need to create our own arena. We need to get this message out there ourselves.
Hello and welcome to the show where I try and make a little sense out of this stunning and increasingly brave new world that we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses about their experiences, interests and concerns. It's important in life to be in touch with your feelings, but it's also crucial to be able to back those feelings up with facts. And so the purpose of this show is to push past purely personal or political promoting positions, separate fact from fiction and fake news headlines in the hope of uncovering important home truths. And today I'm talking Sense Not Sensibility with psychologist Deborah Powney, who is currently in the process of completing a Ptsd investigating the negative and compensatory consequences for male and female victims of intimate partner violence. Deborah is also the co-author of a chapter on intimate partner violence in the Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology and Mental Health 2019, and will no doubt be familiar to many followers of The Glass Blind Spot. Deborah's Twitter handle is Firebird Sight, and her campaign highlighting the stark segregation in statutory funded services currently available to victims of abuse was championed by this channel earlier this year, and will also be the subject of a film available from next week. I'll say more about that at the end of the show, but first let's focus on an exciting new research initiative that Deborah has developed that should be of interest to anyone concerned about the negative and compensatory consequences for male and female victims of intimate partner violence. The Male Victims Study was launched earlier this year, and in stage 1 successfully surveyed a pool of over 200 male victims of abuse about their experiences. In this interview, Deborah talks about some of her initial findings, some of the exciting next steps that she is planning for the project, and how she came to start the study. One thing to mention before we jump straight into it is that stage 2 of the survey goes live next week, and I have some more details about that at the end of the show.
The survey was born of the COVID lockdown. I was literally days away from going ahead with Walk into Recovery, which is the pilot study that I wanted to do about taking men out as a peer mentoring group into the lakes and doing a set of 4 walks, which concluded with Scafell Pike. And it was about looking at the various elements that help men recover. So having a group of like-minded peers around them, because often in abusive relationships, isolation plays a key role in the abuse. I have a hypothesis that it's not that men aren't reaching out for help, it's that the help that is set up is not really appropriate for what men need. Okay. So that was why I was testing that. And I fully intend to test that because I think it's got some really good benefits for men to allow them to just bond as a group, as a band of brothers that get it, because they've all been through it. It might be slightly different experiences, but they get all those feelings that either come out or don't come out. I don't think it necessarily has to be unpicked to recover, but that's another conversation. So just about to go, all excited, and then Boris goes, we're shutting down. So I'm always one to find a silver lining in something. And my immediate reaction was, oh shit, right, now what am I going to do? So I thought, actually, and this was, I was in front of this screen and I'd heard it happen on the other screen. And then I'm very much a pen and ink girl. I don't know if you can see this, but I've got some new green ink that's arrived today, and I've been with my fountain pen. So I literally got off this seat, went and sat on my bed and scrawled out what I would love to ask men if they had nowhere to go and would be able to give me the time of day to fill in a questionnaire.
Okay.
So it fast became a kind, and I'm literally writing this overnight because I wanted to get all my ethics done. I wanted to get all the forms done. I wanted to speak to my supervisor, Nikki. I wanted to get it done pronto, you know, because I didn't know how long lockdown was going to be, and I really wanted to take advantage of it. So I wanted to put in some psychological scales to hit the quantitative analysis that I like to do, that shows me the data that we need. But I wanted it to track a journey. So
okay.
I've taken those 4 psychological scales, goes through the type of abuse that happened in the relationship, and it's actually my supervisor's scale. It's the controlling behaviours scale. So that looks at very much in the model of the control CTS, that it asks about behaviours that you've done in the relationship and behaviours that have been done by your partner.
Okay.
Then I had a look at the Pts Symptomology, so post-traumatic stress symptomology, that doesn't prescribe, as it were, PTSD, but it gives enough serious indicators to show that there's cause for clinical concern in negative effect. Then I looked at coping mechanisms, and that will include everything from positive coping adaptation through to harming behaviour. So drinking to excess to, you know, kind of take the edge off the feelings, all right through to making a plan and, you know, positive and negative adaptations. Yeah. And then finally is a scale that looks at your positive adaptation to trauma. So it takes you from when the abuse started right through to how it affected you, what you used to adapt from that, and if you've adapted positively or not from that relationship. So that's my psychological scales.
Okay.
And they're all very robust, very reliable and valid scales. Because again, I wanted to make sure that this data was going to be a keystone to build upon. And I need it to be really solid because I'm aware of the fragility of all the other data that's out there that we see used all the time. So then I wanted to do a few of the myth-busting questions. So have you asked anyone for help? 86% of the men that had done this survey, which in and of itself is reaching out for help or recognition or whatever. But 86% of the men that answered this survey said they had, whether that was formally or via less formal channels such as friends and family and all that kind of stuff.
And was that broken down? Sorry, was that broken down into kind of friends and family, and then, you know, kind of services?
Yeah, services, hotlines, all sorts of stuff.
And it was still at the kind of the 85% sort of level?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
there's all sorts of stuff in there. And also questions. For every question that I got an answer to, yes, I have done this, I also dug a bit deeper into the no, I haven't done this. I didn't just kind of write it off, because then I wanted to know, why haven't you reached out for it? And again, the data said things from everything from I'm really embarrassed about this to who's going to believe a man.
Okay.
You know, so there's a lot of stuff in there, and often you get some of the best answers on the questions that you would usually just bypass, like, no, I haven't. Okay, cheers, right. Why did you then? But you need to balance these questions out all the time to get a full
to drill down
view of what's going on.
Can I ask, just to pause again, I think this would be useful in terms of your sample, because I'm a little bit surprised by that it's as high as that in terms of reaching out for help. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, in terms of your sample, I know that the call went out via various networks and social media, etc. So then you got a sample. I'm just wondering, do you have any thought about sort of the sample that came back? Because do you want to say who you asked to respond to this?
Yeah, I asked everyone and anyone, but particularly where men would hang out. I mean, I even tweeted football teams and all sorts of stuff.
What I'm getting at is, from my memory, am I right in thinking you were asking for men who had experienced domestic abuse?
Yes, totally.
Okay,
so totally. That was my key focus. This wasn't a general population. Well, I mean, I suppose it's general population in as much as it was snowballed out there. Yeah. But it was specifically about male victims of domestic abuse. I wasn't pulling any punches on this. I literally just wanted this to be about them.
Yeah. No, I suppose one of the reasons I'm asking that is because I suppose, just be interested in your view on this, I suppose to some extent, one has to recognise that you've experienced that. So I'm just wondering, so that sort of makes more sense to me about the 80%.
Utterly, which is why one of the things, I'm just going to jump back before we go any further, but one of the themes that really came out was the level of coercive control. And that's also become a myth since we've had coercive control as a law here. Yeah. Everything I read about it is very much, women are overwhelmingly the victims of coercive control. Men are not really the victims, but they've not asked any men. They've not looked at anything. It's half a story with a half assumption. Yeah. So the control.
I mean, again, sorry to interrupt, but again, not being an expert in this area, but I suppose the first time I heard the term coercive control, it made complete sense to me as to what that meant. Yeah. And it made complete, from my perspective, it was kind of, well, clearly a lot of men who experience domestic violence, it will be of that nature, and that's partly, kind of, men are, potentially more likely to be physically violent, so men are rarely, but so continue,
So that came through the controlling behaviour scale that Nikki developed. Asks quite open questions about that, but not specific enough.
Okay.
So one of the things that really came through from the qualitative answers, which is where I've left the big spaces for people to give me more detail. And some people have given me one line, some people have given me nothing, some people have given me everything. Yeah. And all of them have value, strangely enough, even the ones that have got gaps. Yeah. So the themes that are coming through, coercive control is very strong as a theme. So Nikki and I are in the midst of developing a survey that is just about coercive control for male victims. And because of the success of this survey, we're going to get it translated into, bear with me, I'm bound to miss some, Hindu, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Greek, and I think there's 3 others that I can't remember off the top of my head, because I was contacted after we'd done this and we got 360 odd men from India that said, actually, if this had been in Hindu, you'd have got thousands of responses. So, and then there was people, got a handful of people from Germany that said, if this had been in German, you'd have got hundreds, if not thousands, of responses of this. And the same for every nation that has its own language, that we need to do something about this. So we are going to get it translated, and then we're going to build that in to this survey.
Okay.
And what we're hoping is that not only will we have the biggest survey on coercive control for male victims, but that will become the biggest survey ever on coercive control. The fact that it only includes male victims, okay.
Yeah.
But because there isn't a great deal of research out there on coercive control in the format that we know it to be.
Yeah.
So, and again, to answer a question you asked at the very beginning of this, or how's the data going to get out there? If you have a data set that is not just the biggest coercive control survey on male victims per se, but is the biggest data set on coercive control ever that just happens to be men, how are they going to ignore that?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Because I'm literally of the mindset that I will find a way of buying billboards in London, and I will get this data put on line by line on each of these things. I will go full scale marketing on this to get this data out there.
And I'm sure there's plenty of people supporting that as well. I suppose actually, I can imagine some people are asking the fairly obvious question is, when's it likely to be published?
Well, publishing usually takes 6 months for just a normal survey. And I've literally this evening had a conversation with my supervisor where we're looking at 6 odd papers just from the data set we've got, and then we're going in with the coercive control. Okay. So what I'm thinking we need to do, because obviously we need to get this out there, and I have a responsibility to the people that filled in this survey to give them some data back. So I don't know if you remember, but as the survey was in progress, I was putting out these little snapshots each day of this is where we are, this is what this particular question looks like, these are some of the quotes that have come through, and putting those out. So I think I need to get some time or a cloning machine or something, or just some help to get a website up where I can start putting these snapshots on whilst I do all the academic stuff underneath.
Yeah.
But, and this is a bit of a teaser, next year is a particular important year in our industry. And there's a particularly important person that I'm sure I know you've spoken to recently. And I want to put a conference on next year.
Yeah.
And it's 50 years since Erin Ptsd opened the first ever refuge for women.
Yeah.
And as much as she's been written out of history, she's the creator of this, and it will not go uncelebrated. Also, coincidentally, it's my 50th year. So,
celebration.
Yes. So I want to put on a conference that is an issue-based conference. It's not about gender. It's about the issue of domestic abuse. And so far, initially I was looking at a kind of half-day conference. Then it stretched to a full-day conference. Now we're looking at least 2 days with the amount of people that want to speak there.
Brilliant.
And these are all really robust people that are a blend of academics, people, victims, survivors, frontline service providers, all sorts of people that give us a full breadth of the issue that is domestic abuse. So we're going to put the data out there. We're literally gonna put it all out there as well. Now, this conference is not an academic conference, as I said, so it's open to anybody. But again, because the study was so global, we're having to look at a location where we can stream this. And in order to fund that, rather than buy a ticket where you would in the UK and attend the conference, we're looking at pay-per-view, as it were. So you'll have a full agenda and you'll be able to buy slot time to be part of our conference. You'll be able to send questions to me that Erin's obviously a keynote, and rather than her just stand up and give a speech, we're looking at doing it as a kind of Parkinson interview thing.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
showing my age there with Parky. But so people can actually send us questions and I will ask them to Erin. We'll obviously ask for a small donation for that to fund a very expensive conference. But there's that we have to shed the restrictions that have been put in place for all these years. And rather than try to battle our way into that hostile arena, we need to create our own arena. We need to get this message out there ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. And but just pulling it back to the survey. So I think we've got to the translations that it's going to be repeated. We talked about kind of when it's likely to be published, and you talked about the conference next year.
Yeah, and a website. We're going to have. I want an interactive website.
Yeah.
So that people can put feedback on there. So people can say, I'm having an issue with this. Can you look at asking a question about this? Or because I want it to be a living, breathing organism. This is not. I'm not precious enough to set this in stone. This is like I said. I keep referring to it as a keystone, and we need to build a solid structure on top of that. I'm going to have interviews on there with survivors, victims, you and me, maybe Erin, whoever, and bits of really digestible parts of this data, and enough so that people can have a scan of it in 5 minutes and know where there's a baseline. They can pull things off and put them into presentations. They can have little snapshots of me saying, right, I'll explain this question to you, or and then they can build it in, because the more accessible this is, the more easy this is and user friendly this is, the more likely it is that the message is going to get out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And we're gonna refer to it as the male victim study. That is gonna be it, and we're gonna have.
So.
You know me, shovels a spade, or but we're gonna have merchandise. I'm gonna get someone to do a lovely logo for it, and have some. We're gonna own this shit. We're gonna do something with it, and I'm gonna layer on my marketing and sales background with my academic background, and pull on resources like yourself to say, right, we've just done this, need to get it out there. What are we gonna do?
And that's it. It brings an element of independence as well.
Completely.
Not necessarily kind of relying on funding that's going to make you jump through certain hoops or potentially.
But I must say, the message is getting out there, and I can't say too much at the moment, but private funding is coming in.
Brilliant.
Certainly offers of it and discussions around it. And also I come from a commercial background, so and I understand that people are, and their knowledge is of value.
Yeah.
So when I say things like people can stream in and buy an hour if they're in Australia and they want to see the conference, people aren't going to mind paying a tenner to watch me interview Erin, but we're going to use that to fund the website and the survey and the conference, and I'm going to ask someone to donate to buy me a billboard to advertise the conference on, and for that I'll give you a ticket on a table with Erin for dinner. There's all kinds of ways that we can scratch each other's back, and if someone's got the money to fund it, I'll give you something that's an experience for you as well.
Absolutely.
There's but I will be utterly open and honest about that. I'm not going to say, oh, you're buying a hygiene kit. I'm going to say, you can get a ticket on a table with Erin, but I need you to buy me a billboard.
And we'll show you a picture of the billboard.
Yeah, you can come and have your photograph taken with the billboard. It's we're going to do even things like guerrilla marketing around it. We're again, I can't really say too much. But we don't have a lot of money, but we do have a lot of people with a lot of passion.
Yeah.
And I'm prepared to talk to anybody and everybody about this stuff.
Oh, well, happy day, and sort of, near the time next year, I'm sure we can look at sort of. I'll do my best to promote it through my
Brilliant.
humble, channel. Hopefully, I'll be less criminally undersubscribed by then, so maybe
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
can get my subscribers to buy you a billboard. Okay, listen, you're saying about sort of, those kind of the headline kind of findings and kind of breaking it down, those messages. I suppose kind of, so far, two of the kind of headline findings that I've kind of heard from you is about fear, about kind of the number of men who will happily disclose that they have experienced fear in that relationship, and then the level of coercive control. I suppose the other one that certainly surprised me was the number of people who had asked for help, and including services. What were the other kind of big headlines for you?
Well, again, one of the myths is that that's often put forward for why female services need more money is that it's very difficult for women to leave, and it is. But there's then this woozle that men can just up and leave. So I asked the questions again, and there's a lot of reasons why men don't leave, and again, some of which are absolutely similar to women, including love, respect for their marriage vows and their commitments to the relationship. They signed up for better or worse, even really chivalrous and charitable things like, I think she needs help, and I'm here to help her. I don't think this is the person she is. Through to men saying things like, she controls every aspect of my life. I might be the breadwinner to the public, but I get no access to funds. So if I leave, I'm homeless. I've got nowhere to sofa surf because I've got no friends anymore. I've been completely isolated from that. And then there's things that are like, well, no one's going to believe me. There's no shelters for men. So if I do leave, I've got to leave my children here. And what happens if she moves the abuse from me to them?
Yeah.
Who's going to protect my children? Oh, and then not only will I lose my house, but then I'll be turned into a perpetrator, and then I'll lose my relationship with my children, and then what?
Yeah.
So the similarities were very much, well, I love them, I've made a commitment, I can't leave because I don't have the finances. But then the overriding differences, and this is the heartbreaking thing, because these are the issues that could be solved, is where do I go? No one's going to believe me. What do I do about my kids? And the example that I give often is one that hit me so hard that I literally had to leave my screen and go for a walk, which was a man that had been in the relationship for 30 odd years, and he'd left within the last year. And what he told me in his story was he left because his last child, and I think there was 4 siblings, and she got married and she was in a stable relationship, so now he could leave because he knew they were all out of the house and they were all safe.
Yeah.
So he'd spent 37 years being the shield for his children. And literally my head was thinking, you get less for murder. It's...
Yeah.
And that man should be very proud of himself for doing that. But inside, a little part of my heart cracked because I'm thinking, shit, you gave your life for that.
And it's a story, you hear that about kind of female victims as well.
Oh, totally, yeah.
It's a remarkable, it's just yet another example of the empathy gap that there's that, again, I can think of, kind of certain very abrasive, slightly arrogant kind of feminists throughout the term, why didn't she leave? It's like, oh, people say this, why didn't she leave? And that's just such an ignorant thing to say. And you're describing the reasons why doesn't she leave, but
yes, totally
different gender. And for it not, for there to be no connection in so many people's views. Well, it's easy. He can just walk out. He's not, he's just the father.
We've heard that. How many times have you heard that myth? How many times? but how many times have they actually asked a man that's a victim of domestic abuse, why don't you just leave? I didn't ask it like that because I hate that as a question. I hate it. I've been asked that question myself so many times because where do you want me to start?
There's a reason why it's put out there, because of course, you know, I can understand why there's a frustration with that, because it's kind of, there are so many complexities. The other thing I was going to say, something that struck me, Cassie J, who you know, you'll know, directed The Red Pill. One thing she said, which again sort of kind of completely rang resonance with me about my own naivety, was simply kind of, well, you know, where do men go? Well, you know, she used to think, well, obviously, well, men go to homeless hostels. You know, and I would have kind of followed that logic, and that is kind of the logic that is a reality for many male victims. And when I may be naive, but I'm optimistic that things are not quite as harsh as kicking 12-year, or you know, rejecting 12-year-old children at the door in Northern Ireland. But you know, kind of certainly there are no male shelters in Northern Ireland, so you know, kind of male victims at best will be going through a process, hopefully kind of emergency housing. But you know, kind of certainly that's, you know, it's understood as a kind of major reason for homelessness for a lot of men.
Yeah, but again, we know we have one of the most influential homeless organisations in the UK, the mainland UK, is headed up by an ex-CEO of Women's Aid that's now posting photographs on, not recently I might add, but with a whole band of women stood right next to Jess Phillips going, tackling homelessness for women. And honestly, I'm just thinking, excuse me when I say this, I'm literally thinking, for fuck's sake, why are we doing this? Why does it have to be gendered? And actually, if you took your head out of your arse, you could see that this is exactly the inverse of the shit you spin for domestic abuse about how it disproportionately affects men. And yet you're still finding a weirdly horrible, nasty way to make this a gendered issue.
Yeah. I'm even more than that, kind of the feminist perspective, as I understand it, certainly the likes of, what's she called? I've forgotten her name, something Walker, who until recently was the head of the Women's Equality Party. From her perspective, the majority of homeless people are female. And, you know, kind of, and there's a logic there. There's always a logic. And it's to do with kind of stuff.
Well, what's framed as logic, but actually it's ideology.
No, I mean, to be honest, I would go as far as saying, well, yeah, no, I can see that logic, but the kind of the insidious aspect of it is, we're not, you know, okay, so it's not homeless people that are literally on the streets or even in a hostel, but they are what's described as statutory homeless. They're on waiting lists. They haven't got a house.
Their own home.
Yeah, their own home. And that, so I can accept that. And obviously, you know, kind of the, you know, people talk about sofa surfers, etc. You know, the kind of you know, not all homeless people by a long shot are on the street, but then it, you know, that's feeding into the statutory responsibility on public bodies.
Yes.
Again, it's just, it shocks me to the core that you know, this infrastructure is being built up, and in many regards, well, that's very noble, and that's, you know, who's going to, you know, argue against a public authority having the responsibility to provide housing to homeless people.
Absolutely, but the issue is that it does change policy, and by policy we mean priority. So again, to use a reductionist example, if you've got 4 homeless people, 2 of which are women and 2 of which are men, but you've only got 3 houses, you think they're going to reject one of the women?
No, and that's that. You know, having looked at a couple of councils in London that are being used as, or one particularly that's been used as a kind of model for this, is entirely sold on the gendered narrative, and in terms of the availability of services to male victims of domestic violence, it looks, extremely per partner in the borough with the highest amount of domestic violence in the whole of London. So,
yeah.
So okay, so are there big sort of findings?
Well, the thing, another myth. Sorry to be a myth buster, but a lot of it is myth.
Yeah.
Is that men aren't, because they're not frightened, they don't suffer the horrific and long-term negative affect that female victims do. Have you heard that as a kind of mantra that's put out there? Women most affected is the simplistic term in it, right? So one of the psychological scales that I've got, the one I talked about that looks at PTSD symptomology, has a level, cut-off levels. So if you get over a certain cut-off, then there is clinical concern that may indicate you have PTSD. So you have a post-traumatic stress disorder as opposed to post-traumatic stress symptomology. Okay, because we can all have symptomology, but we can adapt and not go into a disorder. And so half of all the men that answered my question fit into the top that says there is clinical concern for PTSD.
Okay.
Of all of them. There's also a cut-off level that says you're now exhibiting a score that would indicate you have PTS symptomology that could have an impact on your immune system for 10 years. Okay. So, and this has serious health effects, and it could actually get to the point where it reduces your life expectancy. Okay, so this is serious effect. Now, I'm not talking about just the half when I say this. Out of the total amount of men that answered this survey, of which there were around 1,000, a third of them sat in that part of it.
Okay.
A third of them sat in the score level that would indicate that they have symptomology that could have a long-term impact on their physical immune system. Okay, so, and the men within this category, and I've not got to the absolute detail of this yet, but there is no common element of this. There's men from all types of cultures, all types of lengths that were in the relationship, all types of lengths that they've been out of the relationship, with children, without children. But it's looking like, and this could change because it's not confirmed, that it's linked to the level of abuse that they sustained, regardless of culture, age, occupation, anything else. It's absolutely linked to abuse.
And that would make sense. Yeah.
Would make sense. It makes absolute common sense, but once it's all there in statistically significant data, it makes it's completely different. And I'm thinking, no one's actually tested men to see if they've got negative effect. Again, it's another woozle that says women most affected. Yeah. Because we haven't asked men. So there's. And that's important, because what that tells me as someone that hopefully will influence practitioners from this research is that you don't put in treatment based on age, based on occupation, based on culture, based on the amount of time. You base it on need. So you assess a male victim on what is happening to them at the time, not even how long they've left the relationship. You know, what's going on for you now? What's the trauma that you're experiencing now? Yeah. And that's what this scale indicates. Now, I have a different hypothesis, because I look at recovery in all victims of domestic abuse. And there is my research, I must say, that shows that it's not a seesaw recovery where you have more positive effect if you have less negative effect. They can actually be parallel. And there is some evidence that shows that in some instances, with the right levels of support and the right security and everything else, that actually the worse your trauma is can actually indicate that you could be better positively adapted. They can go, recovery tends to go parallel as opposed to seesaw. So you can experience good things whilst you experience bad. It's not binary. It's not one or the other.
Okay. Yeah.
So it will make sense when I publish. So, but
I think I get where you're coming from.
Rather than having an element that says, oh, you can have good if we reduce bad, which tends to be the way we see therapy, what we can see is you can experience good whilst going through the trauma of having a new world view, of finding meaning in the trauma that you've experienced can actually make you come out the other end.
So it's kind of like pushing through and confronting.
Yes. It means that you can shed, and a lot of people that have experienced different traumas go like, I didn't realise how much of my life I was wasting doing the 9 to 5 until my partner died, or I contracted cancer, or developed cancer or whatever. And now I've got through that. I realise that I'm not going to sweat the small shit. I'm not going to give my life to the 9 and 5. I'm going to save up, sell the house, buy a boat, and sail around the world single-handedly. That's an extreme example, but it just shows that people can go through trauma and come out the other end with a different appreciation of life that is better for them.
And that makes sense. I mean, having a fair, understanding CBT to a certain degree, and I've trained in neuro-linguistic programming, which is
excellent.
Looking into sort of areas like hypnosis and stuff. So I understand that kind of, you don't necessarily have to experience that trauma repeatedly, or you don't necessarily. It is possible. It's going to be different for different people, but kind of you can let it go.
But it's just because I don't think we need to label any victim as broken for life. Some people will be, but as a species, we've got through a lot of shit and come out the other end and are still here and hopefully still flourishing. So, but actually what my research showed me is that treatment needs to be based on need. Not on perception of need. You can't make a judgment that says, oh, you've been out in this relationship for 10 years, you'll be fine now, when they're still experiencing all the negative effects of PTS symptoms. There was men that had left a relationship 10 years ago that indicated on the symptomology that they couldn't sleep very well. Okay, so if you just get a scale, it goes, oh, they're not sleeping very well. Oh, right, okay, so maybe we need to give you a sleeping pill, if that's all you're looking at. But I backed this up with qualitative data. And what came about was the reason that man couldn't sleep properly, even 10 years after leaving the relationship, is that it was his partner, who was a woman, used to wake him up by pouring a hot kettle on him.
Yeah.
So is it any wonder he can't sleep? Yeah. Jesus Christ. So we need to look at, of course, he's still going to be suffering the effects of them. So we need to do some treatment that helps him with that symptomology, even 10 years later.
Yeah. Well, that strikes me again as kind of medicine 101 in terms of that kind of, you triage situations, like sort of, I suppose one of the ways.
But the narrative is making that triage impossible for men because they don't even get anywhere near it.
Well, that's what I'm kind of sort of going to the metaphor, kind of like if you rock into casualty and immediately there's two corridors, one for men, one for women, and maybe one's a little bit sort of grottier and.
Yeah, but the men's is also only the door's only that big, so you've got, if you can't get in,
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't get treated, while the women have got these automatic doors that just open up and go, come on in, and
even
but
then, once you get through the door and they do that kind of triage, then it's sort of potentially, well, sorry, we don't actually have any kind of male doctors on call at the minute, so unfortunately you're going to have to come back. Yeah, no, I don't know. You can get very.
Again, it's another myth buster that men do feel negative effect, and what I am going to test, I haven't got to that level yet, and this is why when people say, "Have you published yet?" I'm thinking, well, this is going to be something that the reason I'm only repeating it every 2 years rather than annually is we're almost going to get to the end of that 2 years and I'm going to go, that's that lot of data, let's go again. Because one of the things I want to test is there a difference between, or what's the relationship between recognizing fear and PTSD symptomology? Or can you feel PTS symptomology without recognizing that it's fear? Because I think you can. I hypothesize that you can embody all those symptoms without actually feeling it as fear.
Okay.
Or recognizing it as fear. It might just be that you've recognized it or framed it as something else.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that's in terms of experiencing PTSD, but may not have
not recognizing it as fear. I don't know is the answer. I've got the data. I've got to analyze it.
Okay. Well, that's getting deep dive, but yeah, that certainly would be interesting. Absolutely, kind of one aspect of it is that it is the perception of kind of the person, particularly when they're in that situation, that they don't necessarily see it as abnormal. So
yes, totally.
I could say.
Because there was times, just to give you from my perspective, there was times where I was frightened.
Yeah.
And there's times when I wasn't frightened, but I was functioning at such a hyper level. Everything. When people say they are tuning, they can smell everything, they can hear everything.
Yes.
That hypervigilance.
Yes.
Even though I didn't actually feel frightened at the time, I was anticipating there being an argument or being questioned, but I wasn't exactly fearful.
No, that makes perfect sense, kind of, to me now, because I was particularly even thinking about the kind of current situation. It used to be that there's that phrase, you'd be afraid to even sneeze, kind of thing, in a room. And kind of the environment we're sort of living in with this crisis at the minute.
Yeah.
Kind of heightened situation that everybody's in. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say I'd be afraid of sneezing in public, but I would be very conscious of it.
Exactly. But it might have, but that changes your behaviour.
Yeah.
And if that was your personal, that's how you had to function in your house, it would make you hypervigilant.
Yes.
And you know that because it makes you hypervigilant when you're outdoors.
Yes. And then it's only when you kind of find yourself in a situation where it's kind of like, oh, actually, so not everybody else does this at home.
Yes.
Then start to sort of.
So the argument of men aren't fearful could be debunked. That says they might not be fearful, but they certainly get the same effect.
Now that's an argument that certainly makes perfect sense to me. I'm sure you'll agree that the male victim survey is going to be an interesting project to follow. And as Deborah mentioned during the interview, coercive control will be a major focus of Stage 2. Although the law frames coercive control as a gender-neutral crime, the related statutory guidance refers to violence against women and children, and as a consequence, research to date tends to focus on female victims. And various reports make assumptions about the suffering of male victims without actually including any men within the scope of their study. The coercive control study for male victims has been developed by Deborah in partnership with Professor Nicola Graham-Keevan. and aims to provide men that have endured coercive control with a much needed voice. If you know anyone you think might be interested in participating, now is a good time to get in touch with Deborah, because she will be launching the second stage of the survey next Thursday on International Men's Day. Deborah's details are obviously included in the show notes, and I for one am certainly looking forward to hearing much more about her research. And happily, you can hear more about her research very soon, because she will be speaking at the International Conference on Men's Issues 2020, which runs from the 14th to the 19th of November. This year it will be a virtual conference, so you can follow it online, and I'm proud to say that it will also feature an exclusive film by The Glass Blind Spot that also happens to feature Deborah. I'll drop some more details about that very soon, but for now all that remains for me to do is to thank my very special guest, Deborah Powney, and thank you very much for listening. Don't forget, if you've listened this far and enjoyed this content, then you can help support this channel by liking, subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing this video with someone you know. And of course, as always, if you see an elephant,
can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.